Good morning, folks. My name is Jimmy Bashar with the ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the ISO call to discuss the revised draft tariff language for Phase 1 of the Hybrid Resources Initiative, which, as you know, finalizes the proposal for co-located resources. I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Andrew Ulmer from the Federal Regulatory Affairs Department and Bill Weaver from our legal department, who will be our presenters for today. I'm also joined by John Gooden and Gabe Murtaugh from our Market and Infrastructure Policy Development Group, Gabe being the policy lead for this initiative. Our agenda for today, as with all of our tariff calls, will be to review the draft language that we are proposing to file with FERC. This call will discuss that, of course, for Phase 1 implementation for co-located resources, and to clarify the Phase 2 proposal for hybrid resources will still be forthcoming within the next draft final proposal iteration. In addition, calls and webinars are recorded for stakeholder convenience, allowing those who are unable to attend to listen to the recordings after the meetings. The recordings will be publicly available on the ISO webpage for a limited time following the meetings. Of course, the recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And lastly, of course, if you have any questions, we do encourage verbal questions only. However, if I do see any written questions come through in the chat, I'll be sure to verbalize for folks. You can raise your hand virtually by pushing #2. And of course, we please request that you state your name and the company that you represent. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrew.
Hi, good morning. This is Andrew Ulmer. I'm the Director of Federal Regulatory Affairs with the ISO. With Bill Weaver, I'm working on developing some tariff language in connection with our Phase 1 Hybrid Resource Initiative. What I think we'd like to do today is talk a little bit about process, talk a little bit about the draft tariff language we've posted, probably utilizing the comparison document that we also posted that shows the changes from an earlier draft set of tariff revisions we posted in June, and then have a discussion, answer any questions that you may have. But I'll start with process, and that is we're trying to develop draft tariff language at this point in time, even though we have not yet brought this initiative to our Board of Governors. That is going to happen later this month, and ultimately we'll be looking at the draft tariff language to ensure it's entirely consistent with whatever policy direction we get from the Board of Governors. And we could probably anticipate that we would post yet another version of this draft tariff language for stakeholder review after the Board of Governors meeting. And after this call, that incorporates the input that we receive. And likely we'll also post a matrix of comments we've received and responses to those comments so that stakeholders understand what we've done with the draft tariff language vis-a-vis the comments they've submitted. So thanks everyone for all the input we've received so far, and thank you for making time today for this discussion and providing your feedback to us. With that, maybe what I'd like to do very briefly is just draw your attention to the comparison document that we've posted on our website, and I think it's being shared in connection with this discussion. I'd like to just simply walk through some of the changes that we've made, which respond to some stakeholder comments and also some further thinking we've had. If you look at the if you look at the comparison document, which reflects a red line from the tariff language we posted in June, you can see we begin with definitions that we would set forth in Appendix A to our tariff. The first definition would define the aggregate capability constraint that we're proposing to utilize or allow co-located resources to utilize. And the changes we've made are really more clarification than anything else. We've broken out the definition for generating units that comprise a single generating facility within the ISO balancing authority area, and also EIM participating resources. and made some changes to reflect some comments we received from I think the Large Solar Association, EDF Renewables, and SEIA, I believe. We've also added a definition for co-located resource based on similar comments we received to try to be very precise as to what we're referring to in the context of the aggregate capability constraint. As you scroll down through the document, we've also included the definition of hybrid resource. As I think we talked about, this phase one addresses both the aggregate capability constraint we're proposing that co-located resources may elect to utilize, and as well as some requirements with respect to hybrid resources that are not co-located but are comprised of different technologies, fuel sources, to provide us with, to the extent they have a variable component or an intermittent component, to provide us with meteorological and outage information, as well as what we're referring to as a high sustainable limit. As you go through the document, the comparison document, we did make some additional changes to the tariff language that describes the aggregate capability constraint to try to make it more precise as to which resources could make the election to utilize the aggregate capability constraint. And we made some clarifications as well with respect to what might happen in cases where resources don't adhere to the aggregate capability constraint and potentially do not adhere to the limitation of their interconnection service rights at their point of interconnection. So we had initially proposed that if that were to occur, we would prorate the resources PMAXs, the generating units PMAXs on a pro rata basis. We've included some language that allows some more flexibility for the interconnection customer to request that we allocate the interconnection service rights among the generating units in a different proportion. We've also added some language that I think, as we discussed earlier in this phase one, as an initial effort, we would have a limitation on co-located resources that are utilizing the aggregate capability constraint, a limitation that would not allow them to provide ancillary services. And we added some language that instead of having to return and file a new tariff amendment, that we might lift that limitation through a more efficient process simply by informing the market. And I would say that there's a clarification here that we've yet to add, but we probably do need to add, and that is that this initial limitation would also extend to flexible ramping uncertainty awards. And so that's something that we will likely add to this language. And then finally, we added some clarifying language to section 4.82 with respect to forecasting, just to clarify a point that this is intended to extend to hybrid resources, as that term is now defined, and not co-located resources. And that really sort of sums up the changes that we've made since the June draft tariff language posted. Again, we are still looking at this. We would very much appreciate any feedback today, any questions that we can discuss with stakeholders, and then we do anticipate posting yet another draft version of this, but likely that would come after any Board of Governors discussion and decision, which is scheduled to occur next week. Maybe there I'll pause, and Jimmy, let you see if we have any questions or comments from stakeholders pending right now.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks again, folks, for joining us today and participating. As a reminder, push #2 if you'd like to ask a comment.
We do have one on the line. Caller, go ahead.
Hi. Yes, hi. This is Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, first of all, I want to thank you very much for putting out a markup draft from the last one, so it's easy to see what changes were made, and so we really do appreciate that. It makes it a lot easier to go through this process, and also thank you for incorporating apparently a lot of the changes that the LSA and EDF and SIA had proposed. I just had a couple of questions and requests. It turns out that I only noticed this. I don't know if did you guys send out a notice when you posted this tariff language that there was going to be a call and a notice for that?
Yes, as part of every call. No, yeah, we post the language and the notice associated with that.
I didn't realize you had even posted it until maybe 2 days ago, so we're going to be pretty limited in what we can offer to you today, although obviously we'll take a look and give you some more detailed comments if we have any on these. But my request is when you post another version of this, would you please send out a notice? If you did and I missed it, I apologize. But just looking at the calendar for other purposes, I said, oh, they must have posted this line like 2 days ago. And so we really are going to be a little limited on what we can give you today. So if there's any way when you post the next version, you could send out maybe a separate notice or note it in the daily bulletin or something like that, that would really be extremely helpful.
Yeah, we will certainly do that, and we will take what you have today certainly as well. So.
Okay, well, I'll offer what we can here. And then the only other comment I had with that was the idea that these projects can't provide ancillary services if they're using the aggregate capability constraint. That's something that was talked about a lot in the stakeholder process. The idea that they couldn't provide flexible ramping capacity, uncertainty, that was not discussed and not part of any of the proposals that I recall seeing. So before you add something like that, it would be good to have an explanation of some kind as to why you would put that additional limitation there.
Yeah, I think to the extent we make any further changes with respect to this, I think we will add an explanation associated with any additional revisions we make, so that okay. the next iteration that you're reviewing, you can say, okay, I understand this. I may not agree with it, but I understand this, or otherwise. So.
Okay, that would be very helpful. And the other positive thing I want to say, just from what I have looked through, is this: it looks like you paid a lot of attention now to the generating facility versus the generating unit idea. And I know there was some confusion in the last version, and I want to thank you for doing that, because I think that's going to make everyone's life a lot easier going through these complicated things here. So I wanted to thank you guys for that as well. And that's all I've got for now.
Okay. Susan, thank you.
Hello, Andrew.
Caller, your line is unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Andrew, this is Albus Caboto, PG&E. Actually, I wanted to pursue a little further what that, are there other resources currently that are, so you said that essentially a co-located pair of resources neither of them will be able to provide real-time flexible ramping product up or down. And so that would mean to me that those units will their capacity cannot be reserved in the look-ahead process. So the only way they can be dispatched is with binding energy dispatches. I'm not sure. Are there already resources that are in that category that are treated that way in the real-time dispatch process, or not? Because it seemed to me the way that flexible ramping has been described up to now is every resource that's bid into the real-time market, certainly resources with 5-minute dispatch capability, would be automatically optimized based on their ramp rate. So I'm just curious as to whether any changes are involved in doing this or whether this is already a capability.
Okay, I'm not sure I captured that question, but yeah, the theory would be that if we had two resources, let's say two co-located resources that came to the ISO and said, well, the interconnection said, the customer said, we want to utilize this aggregate capability constraint, then at least initially those two resources, albeit maybe they were capable if they weren't using the aggregate capability constraint, to receive a flexible ramping award, that those would not be initially considered by the optimization in purposes.
Yeah, that's what I understood. What I'm basically asking is just to confirm, and I think you are confirming it, that capability is already available. There's no software change involved in that. You are currently potentially not using resources for flexible ramping that are dispatchable in the 15 and 5-minute market.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So again, I mean, this is a proposal that is allowing us to say, okay, we have two resources located behind a point of interconnection with a limited interconnection service right. We can either cut their PMAXs down in the new resource implementation process to a lower amount so that their aggregate PMAXs don't exceed that interconnection service right, or we can allow them to co-locate with these higher PMAXs and use this aggregate capability constraint to manage the combined output of those resources at the point of interconnection. So it's it's a bit of a bargain, at least to begin with in this initial phase, to allow these resources to do that and participate with higher PMAXs, but submit to some of these conditions that are coming with the aggregate capability constraint in terms of our ability to support it during this first year.
Yeah, and I understand the intention. I think the difference between spin and flexible ramping is you can simply say if a resource is in that category, it cannot provide spin. There's no absolute changes in software. So I believe what you're saying. You're not just saying you think, you're saying you confirm that the systems are currently capable of doing that, of excluding resources for flexible ramping. And that's all I really was asking, and I appreciate the answer.
Yeah, that's my understanding of our power systems technology group.
Yeah, I just want to have certainty on that in terms of the market software. So I think you've given me that certainty. Thank you.
And Andrew, this is Gabe. Just to add on to that a little bit, this really is a byproduct of getting this software implemented in fall of 2020, which is what we're anticipating right now. By the time we get to the release in the fall of 2021, when we plan to have the entire Hybrid Resources Initiative implemented, we should have a full solution for co-located resources where they will be allowed to provide ancillary services. We just need that additional time for our technology team to develop and implement that additional capability.
Right. But we can certainly expand on our explanation when we do post the next version of draft tariff language.
Caller, your line is unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Michael Volpe from PG&E. I wanted to bring up to stakeholders that I noticed a difference between the CPUC definition of a co-located resource and this new draft tariff language definition of a co-located resource. I do like that this new definition in the draft tariff language focuses on the unit and switches to this kind of framework of unit versus facility. But I do want to point out that this doesn't match with what the CPUC's current definition is, and I don't know if CPUC is on the call, but maybe can see if this might be a problem in the future, or how how that issue would be handled.
Hey, Michael, this is Gabe. I might take that question. You know, I think with where we're at right now with our policy development, and you know, I guess first I think we'd say that we acknowledge that the CPUC has gone forward with definitions for hybrid and co-located resources. I think that they've done that in a good faith effort with what the ISO had been developing at that time in terms of the policy. With where we're at in the policy right now and the information we have about how we're going to be operating these resources, we think that these definitions that we put forward are sort of the best that we can do in terms of these definitions. Of course, we're going to continue to work with the CPUC through their RA process so that we can get these two, the ISO's processes and the CPUC processes as closely aligned as we possibly can. So we're, I'd say that's an ongoing effort. And here at the ISO, we're certainly not going to, let up with our work in terms of trying to coordinate these two programs. But I think your point is well taken, and we're going to continue to iterate with the CPUC on this.
Thanks. And oh, sorry. Do you think it'd be worthwhile to maybe consider introducing another term, which is co-located facility, which is comprised of two co-located resources? Because I think folks are going to start talking about these resources as if they are facilities, and when they're in fact the individual units, might get confusing.
Well,
yeah, oh, go ahead, Bill.
I would say, that's a possibility, but co-located generating units still also meet still fall under the definition of a single generating facility. I think part of the issue here is that we're only looking at these definitions in a vacuum, and really you have to put them in the context of our interconnection procedures and our interconnection agreements where they're used throughout, and see where the distinction actually matters.
Yeah, just a supplement on Bill's comment. I think we'll certainly take a look again at the PUC's definition and see how it's been framed in comparison to this and think through that. But, the context of how we're applying these defined terms, I think we'll have to figure out, even if the definitions are not matching, does it create any inconsistencies or problems as we step forward? So we appreciate the comment. We'll definitely look at it.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley with Western Power Trading Forum. Can you hear me? Good morning?
Yes. Hi, Carrie.
Okay, good.
Good morning.
I was wondering, I was getting confused by the co-located resource definition as well. And I think it was that it has a unique resource ID. What happens, should it be IDs? What happens when there's 4 facilities behind the interconnection? In the example that Gabe brought up in the last meeting where there was 2 hybrids, and so they were considered a co-located resource. Does this definition capture that example?
This is Bill. I'll take a shot at this. I would say the definition is sufficiently flexible to cover situations where, let's say, I have 4 different generating units per se, but I'm operating, maybe 2 resource IDs. It's really those 2 resource IDs that are the co-located resources. Obviously, if they would be, this is assuming, let's say, the 2 different sets are similar fuel types, but together they would be mixed. So I think that that answers your question well. That's kind of what we're going for here, is to have it be broad enough where we don't want to trap everyone
who really doesn't want to be, a different co-located resource into these rules. Yeah, does that make sense, Carrie?
Yeah, I think my issue is that it's a generating unit with a unique resource ID, but in the example where you have two hybrids owned by separate SCs behind an interconnection, it's not a generating unit with a unique resource ID. In that case, it's a generating facility with a unique resource ID, and it's not part of another generating facility, right? It's just behind the interconnection with another facility. So I guess.
Yeah. So you're yeah. With that in mind, we would want to. Okay. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay.
I think and Kara, I think so far we've thought about co-located resources as being co-located at a single generating facility. We haven't thought about multiple generating facilities, co-locating with each other. That is, two hybrid generating facilities, if you will, teaming up to become co-located with each other. But instead, at the generating facility level, making an option about, do I go the hybrid route or do I go the co-located route?
Well, let's take a step back. So they're not teaming up, just to be really clear. They're two separate SCs, they're two separate facilities, but you just have four resources behind it, right? And two are owned by one company and two are owned, contract with another. So they have two separate scheduling coordinators. And this is a really common circumstance right now after, the last interconnection MMA conversion results came out. So, so in that case, I asked this question on the last stakeholder call, and Gabe said that even if one of those resources set up as a hybrid, as we imagine it, let's actually not use hybrid, let's say as a single resource AD, and then the other resource sets themselves up as a single resource AD. So under these definitions, they both think they're hybrids, but how the optimization would actually treat them, Gabe said you'd want to treat them like co-located because now you have two single resource IDs with four generating facilities, right, using that aggregate capability constraint. And so I'm just saying under this definition, you're not capturing that scenario. So if you want to treat those resources using the aggregate capability constraint, I think you'll need to change this definition.
I think it definitely, again, the issue that we're looking at the definition, in a vacuum. I think if you look at Section 2713, what we proposed, it still would allow these co-located hybrids to use the aggregate capability constraint. And,
allow or require?
So the aggregate capability constraint we're proposing is really an election that an interconnection customer can make.
But if you have two interconnection customers and you have two SCs, and it's the SC making the decision, and you have two, what if one elects it and one doesn't?
Yeah. So again,
wait. That's a false premise here because it's a single interconnection customer.
That's the point I wanted to make. That Bill's saying. The way we've thought about this is that an interconnection customer that has generating units at a generating facility may elect to co-locate those generating units at that generating facility. That single interconnection customer overseas. So we haven't thought about having separate interconnection customers come to us with separate generating facilities and say, we want to co-locate these. Instead, we've thought about a single interconnection customer's generating facility.
I see. So
even though another way, put another way, different interconnection customers couldn't be co-located or form a hybrid.
Right. So you're saying this is not a scheduling coordinator choice. This will be an interconnection customer choice that you'll do within the NRI process?
correct.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I was very alarmed to hear that last discussion. I think you came out in the right place. But I think part of the problem is we had asked kind of early on to see if you could put some examples together, and we spent quite a lot of time in our last set of comments putting some examples together and asking that you confirm our conclusions, because I think you came out in the right place, which is basically just because there's two hybrid resources or multiple generating facilities behind a single POI doesn't mean there's a aggregate capability constraint issue. It's only, two hybrid resources, which are two different interconnection customers, you're not going to have this issue. So, I mean, I think you came out in the right place, but I think if you could go back and look at those examples or put a couple of your own out there, I really, maybe it'll go into the BPMs eventually or something, because you have a lot of useful things like that in BPMs. But if you could put some of that forward, I think it would make sense. I think you defined it right here, but we don't want to start getting confused with just because they're behind the same point of interconnection that somehow there's an aggregate capability constraint issue if they don't have overlapping uses of their part of the POI, if that makes sense, or they're part of the interconnection service. So I think it's just really important to be very, very clear, and the more examples, or if any examples you put out there, would very much clarify that situation. So it's a request at some point, sometime soon, but even if you can't do it before the tariff language is filed, I just think you could avoid a lot of those kind of discussions where this really isn't going to apply.
Yeah, this is Gabe.
Everyone at once.
I'll take this question. We did see your comments in the last version of our language, and we appreciate them. I am planning to include some additional examples in the next version of our draft final proposal, which we should be putting out within the next month. So you will be seeing those soon. But yeah, we're working on them right now.
Okay, because it's not really. Okay, anytime you put it out there, thank you, Gabe. That would be fabulous and extremely helpful to the discussion. So thank you for including those whenever you can get them out.
Yeah, and Susan, this is Andrew. Just that's very good guidance. I think you can certainly expect that at a minimum, when we do present this to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the revised tariff languages will be including some examples as to what this means practically.
Great, also extremely helpful. Thank you.
And this is Bill to finish the thought. I just want to say, this is, policy and legal have made this decision to now start really stakeholdering the tariff revisions sort of before we finish the policy process. This is purposeful specifically to, flush out these issues that we might not be catching in the policy process, but that we catch in the tariff process, and then can use that to inform the policy process kind of before we go to the board. So I think we understand that it's a little messier, but, these are the exact results we're looking for. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah. And we actually appreciate that, too, because sometimes things will come out in this discussion where you go, I didn't know you meant that. And no, it is, I think this, you're right, it is messier, but I think this is a good process improvement.
Great. Thanks, Susan.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley again. I just want to say, sorry, I didn't say what Susan just said, but this is a lot better. WPTF really supports this new process, and I'm thinking through the issues in a different way when you go through the tariff. And I just feel this is a huge improvement in the process generally, and I love the bounce back and forth between policy and tariffs generally. So thank you guys very much. I think you're doing a great job. That's it.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie.
We have no further questions at this time.
So this is Andrew again. Maybe what I can do is return to process. We do have a board meeting scheduled next week. This is an item that will be discussed at the board meeting. I think based on that discussion, we'll be regrouping internally and looking to revise this tariff language, draft tariff language, and repost it.
And I think with that reposting, we're happy to provide some further explanations. Probably we'll do that in the context of a matrix, both responding to comments we've received so far and then also highlighting any additional changes and providing an explanation for those changes. We would probably make that available in early August for stakeholder review.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks again, folks, for your participation. Really appreciate it given the current events, of course. As Bill mentioned as well, Susan and Carrie, thank you for the input on our stakeholder process. This was a revision of it, and we appreciate how it's been working out so far to catch this input prior to going to the board. As mentioned, this was recorded. I will try to get that posted ASAP. Usually it's within 2 to 3 business days of the meeting. And as Andrew mentioned, you can look forward to future material being posted soon before the board. And I believe the board agenda and material is starting to be posted as well on the board page, so you can reference that as well. Once more, thanks again, folks, and have a great rest of your day.
That concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect.